Okay, so this evening I'm not exactly sure what we are going to talk about particularly, but I do have a place to start. So I'd like to start in Revelation 16 just for a moment, just to be aware of why we talk about taking preventative lifestyle choices. And you may think this is a strange place to go to talk about preventative measures concerning lifestyle. But we'll go to chapter 16 and you will understand why when we see the situation on the earth when the 7 last plagues are poured out. If we go to verse 2, and it's talking about the 7 last plagues, and the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them that worshipped his image. So here we have a noisome and grievous sore. Just put a bad sore. This is a sore of no ordinary nature. Here we have a condition which will throw all the medical resources that there are at this time into a spin. They won't be able to cope with this noisome and grievous sore upon the people who receive it. And it says that this plague is not worldwide, but it covers quite a portion of the world. And once again, these plagues, and we're seeing plagues in the medical world today, the medical side of things, or the health side, which we would have to say are very unusual and very dangerous. Is that true? It is true. And they are spreading over different parts of the world. Now, some of these are created by man himself, but a lot of them are the outworking of lifestyle choices. And that's why God gave a message, a health message in the first place. Back in 1863 and onwards, this health message has been sounding and has been taken up by many people in the world. So this sore is just the last one or one of the last ones of these great disturbances to people's health, which will take place at the end of time. Now, before that, these problems, these medical problems, are going to continue. And they're going to get worse because God has created a person to gain health by obeying nature's laws. But as man gets further and further away from obeying nature's laws, then health problems will get worse and worse. And the chemical solutions that are being used aren't working. They may make things better for a while, but the chemical solutions create new problems as well. And this is the problem. Now, the next one I want to go to is the one found in verse 8. The plague found in verse 8, which is the fourth plague. And the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch men with fire. And men were scorched with great heat, and blasphemed the name of God, which had power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. So here we have a plague of heat. Heat. Great heat, and it mentions fire. Now this is already happening in the world today. The ecology, is there anyone who doesn't know what ecology means? Do you know what ecology means?
No.
Sorry?
No.
Okay. Well, ecology means how nature works, basically. How nature works. How nature works under God is true ecology. So the relationship between the sun, the winds, the temperatures, the man-made problems like pollution and that sort of thing, how this will affect the planet is the ecology of the planet. How what man does and how what Satan does and how what God does, how that affects the planet is the ecology. Now in Australia we're having this heat and this fire at this time, which is the beginning of a trend which will get worse. Now when we went to Alaska, there was big fires in Alaska, bigger fires than there'd ever been before. And not only that, but it's not only happening in Australia and Alaska, but also throughout the northern regions. Siberia had big fires, big bushfires. And the big forests up there in June in the summer. Also, at the same time that Australia is suffering from drought and heat, this is also happening in the southern part of Africa. At the same time, the southern countries of Africa are in the same condition, and that is causing famine, and will cause more famine as a result. And in the northern hemisphere, some countries are getting more rain than usual. They're getting floods. This is the type of thing that will happen. Now, it's not God doing this directly. It's as God is no longer welcomed by people of the earth, then there'll be a withdrawal of his power. And then Satan will manipulate nature. And then nature itself, out of control, will cause great calamities. Now, I won't talk about the other two plagues between, but I do have some thoughts on them. So I won't talk about them at this time. So that's what I wanted to talk about, the plagues. So this is what is going to happen. Medical problems are going to increase because man is not living in harmony with the health laws that God has given. And chemical and current medical solutions are not going to cope with what is going to come. I know some of you work in that area, and as time goes on, you will, no matter what you think now, whether you agree or not, you'll see that this is what will happen. There'll be these problems will grow so out of proportion that they can't be controlled with chemicals and with drugs. For instance, diabetes is something that's out of control already. And the only effective remedy for diabetes that I have seen has to do with diet. A good diet and exercise, the health laws. Because ultimately, here in Honiara, people are getting their legs cut off and fingers missing, so forth and so on. Now, God had a solution to this. In 1863, the Adventists were given the health message, which was God foreseeing what was going to happen to people on this earth. God foresaw it, and He gave the Adventists health tips. He gave the SDA Church information as to how to avoid the problems that are multiplying today. Not only that, but how to share that information. And God also gave the prophet Ellen White to guide the church as to how this information would be multiplied throughout the earth. We have Ellen White, and those of you who were with me before the camp meeting in the evenings, we read about the special information that God gave to Ellen White and the way that that information was communicated to her. Now, the information that was given to Ellen White, we can call a blueprint. Of how to go forward in these last days. Now, this blueprint was almost always the same wherever it was put into practice. And it always involved certain things. And it's a blueprint that is still relevant today for sure. Now, Ellen White was shown that the Adventists would have opportunities to buy properties in America at a cheap price, which was suitable for the type of institution which she advised them to enter into. And she led out in many of these purchases, encouraging, and she got special light on special places that they were to buy in America, and then in Australia, and also in Germany, and then South Africa too, I believe. So it was always the same basic outline. There was always a large piece of land attached. There was a large piece of land involved that she said was not to be sold. Was not to be sold for profit and was to be used in agriculture, attached to these institutions. Now, in many cases, there were buildings already there, and that made it all the easier for them. They bought many of these places at a cheap price, and the buildings were there, and they were to add normally or make a sanitarium attached. Who knows what the word sanitarium means? Do you know, Esther? What the word comes from?
Sanitation.
Yeah, that's right. I never realised that until the other day I read it. Comes from the word sanitation or sanitary, which means to keep clean, doesn't it? To keep clean. So sanitarium is about cleaning the body. Cleaning the body. When the body is clean, disease struggles to find a place to enter in a clean body, in a body that's clean internally. Disease has difficulty penetrating and creating dis-ease. What is disease? Dis-ease. Lack of ease. The two words. So we can say when we have disease, we're not at ease. Can't we? We feel off. So there would be a sanitarium in just about all of these places. There would be a school. Now these schools were missionary schools. They weren't ordinary schools, they were missionary schools with a purpose. And that purpose was to train people as rapidly as possible to take this information, to take this message, more than information, to take this message throughout the world to new places and to establish places like this in new satellite places of the world. So, in the ordinary schools, what did they learn? They learned English, maths, science, the classics, and things like that. But in these missionary schools, they had these large tracts of land. For instance, the place they bought in Australia, I think, was 1,495 acres. So it was, I think, roughly 1,500 acres of land. And that is a lot of land, isn't it? It is. How big would this place be? 3 acres? Where it's fenced, maybe 3 acres, I would guess. We're talking about 1,500 acres. A big area of land. Now, agriculture was important. Agriculture was very important. Already I'm running out of room. Now, agriculture is so important for 2 reasons. Agriculture is the culture of the soil, isn't it? It's the culture of the soil. If you have healthy soil, if you farm using nature's methods, organic methods, you will get healthy people. People are eating the produce from the soil. It will lead to healthy people. So that was one reason that these big tracts of land, as big as they could afford to buy, were bought, and she said they were not to be subdivided and made into homes for the people who worked in the institute, in the schools. No, they were to be left to grow fruit and vegetables and that type of thing. Now these farms that were attached were to train people in agriculture, but they were also to generate income because the students were poor. Back in the 1800s, the students were very poor, and they sold the produce from the farm to support their learning. So normally they would work, say, 4 hours or 6 hours on the farm, and then they would do 4 to 6 hours schoolwork. But the curriculum was different to the normal curriculum of the time. Agriculture was one thing, then there was mechanics, then there was building, then there was Bible, and there was maths and science and English. But then there was Bible history. There was also things to do with the sanitarium side, or creating medical missionaries who would be trained as Esther trains people, or and as Esther works, who would understand anatomy, and physiology, etc., and also the water treatments, who would understand diet and nutrition, and so forth and so on.
Home economics?
Pardon? Home economics, that's right. Cooking, sewing, cleaning. So we say home economics. Now, in these colleges, the people would learn for maybe 2 or 3 years, and that would be it. They'd learn these skills, as many skills as they could get, and then the idea is that they would go out as missionaries. Now, say someone from America, from one school, they sent missionaries from America to Cuba, which is just below United States. So that's one example. So when those people arrived in Cuba, the men knew how to build. They could build a house. They knew something about how to treat the sick. They knew so many different things. They knew how to fix something if it broke down. They were used to working hard, but they had developed minds too. They could give Bible studies. They could speak. They learned how to take studies like we do, and so forth and so on. So they learned all these things so that when they reached a new country, they were able to establish something there and get something going. And that was the plan that God had. Now these schools were begun all over America. There must have been 10 or 15 of them, something like that, over a period of time. Actually more than that, but these are more of the minor ones. So God had a plan to take the gospel to the world from 1844 onwards, and that is how it was going to be developed. Now, not everything was done according to the pattern that was showed to Ellen White, unfortunately. So these properties that were bought, the one in Australia had a very large tract of land. Some of them had like 120 acres or 150 acres, things like that. Well, what they did, it wasn't Ellen White who had anything to do with this, or those who supported her, but the general conference that developed in the church decided to sell off the land. So they started to sell bits of the land off of many of these institutions. And in that way, they sold the land and they made bigger buildings with the money, or they used it somewhere else. And so instead of being a country sort of a school, gradually it got more and more buildings on it. And then they built bigger churches in these places. And so on. So if you go to many of these places today, you'll see they're just buildings in cities. That's all that's left of them. Now the original plan was that these would be remarkable centres of truth and light in midst of great big cities. For instance, you imagine if there was 1,000 acres in the middle of Nashville or some of these other places, Boston, as the cities, these places were to be outside the city. They were normally to be located, say, about 60 k's or 30 to 60 k's outside a city. And from these places they could send missionaries into the cities, and the children, the young people, wouldn't get corrupted by the city because they would be able to come home to these places. But over the years these cities would grow up around these places. But you imagine 1,000 acres in the middle or to the edge of one of those big cities, and what a difference between the two there would be. And all the people in the city would see what was going on in these Adventist colleges. So God tried to, through Ellen White, set up many of these places. And the efforts were frustrated over and over again by selling off the land. And then the Adventists gradually wanted to be accredited. The people who came to train in the sanitarium wanted a degree, but the leaders decided to get the degree that came from the government. Instead of creating their own degrees for their own trainees, they decided to get the government accreditation. And it worked all right in the beginning. But as time went on, for the Seventh-day Adventists to get their accreditation for their trained people, they had to start using the chemical or the drug therapy. And then, as time went on, they were told that they would have to open their institutions to having non-Adventist teachers and doctors and nurses in the sanitariums. Now, when those people came in, they didn't believe in the spirit of prophecy. They didn't believe in the healthy health message. And so the institutions gradually became just like all the others. So today, if you go to a big Adventist hospital, like Loma Linda, you won't find it much different to the other hospitals in California or United States. So basically, they gradually lost the peculiar nature of the plan that God was trying to work out. Now here in Malaita you have a good place. I've been to it, a college that Esther and Lydia and I went to last year, wasn't it? That was quite a good college. It has many of these principles in it. And it's really good to see. But generally worldwide there's hardly anybody who's doing this anymore. Now, so the last two that Ellen White was involved in setting up were that she was closely involved in setting up were Loma Linda and Madison. Now Madison was more in the south near Nashville, Tennessee. Which today Nashville is a very big place, but back then it was much smaller. And the other one, Loma Linda, was set up in California. Now in God's providence, we were in California not long ago. And we drove past Loma Linda. And when we drove past, we saw big buildings there, but no land much at all around those buildings. Certainly not agriculture going on around them to any extent. So basically it was big buildings. And as I said, Loma Linda today is not much different from an ordinary hospital. They may have some health programs attached to it, but generally it's not what it was supposed to be. Now, the difference between Loma Linda and Madison is that when Ellen White was involved in setting these up, there was a man, I think his name was Burden, who found Loma Linda. Loma Linda was a very special place. It was a very beautiful place in California, and the buildings were really grand. It was already set up as a type of sanitarium or a hospital. But it had been set up by some doctors and businessmen, and it had failed. It was a failed health resort, basically. And it had buildings, some very nice buildings on it. And they got it at a very, 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 very cheap price. Very, very cheap price for back in those days. So it came to them very cheap in God's providence. And Ellen White, when it was set up, she made sure that this man Burden was in charge. And he worked there for some time, and he was working to keep this place the way Ellen White wanted it to be, on that pattern. But gradually they registered this place with the General Conference or the local conference, I'm not sure which. And gradually the conference took out the people who wanted to run it like it was supposed to be run. They took them away to somewhere else, and they put people in there who would run it like they wanted it run, which was different to the way it was originally supposed to run. And that's just what happened if you read the history. So eventually there was sort of a battle went on, and the scales tipped one way and another, and eventually the Loma Linda became like basically an ordinary hospital today. Now, for the first time, Madison, which was set up roughly at the same time, was set up under a different system, a different system of ownership, I should say. Every one of these school sanitarium places was under the conferences, the Seventh-day Adventist conferences, and every one lost the peculiarity of the way they were set up to operate. Every one of them, sooner or later. So before Ellen White became too old to take part in this type of work, she was directed to this piece of land near Nashville, and she had two men who wanted to work with her in setting up a school in the south part of United States, near Nashville. Now, why it was to be in the south was to help the Negro people who had been taken to America as slaves, and they now had freedom. They had the right to be free, and it was the Seventh-day Adventists pioneers who came into the South to help the Negro people who were there to get a decent life. And so the school was set up near Nashville in the southern part of America. Now the story of how this land was chosen is very interesting. There were two men, Percy Magan and E.A. Sutherland. And they wanted to set up a school. They were both leading educators in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They wanted to set up a school that would be run along the correct lines. So they were in the south to look at land, and Ellen White's son had a paddle steamer, and he was going on a trip up the Mississippi River, I think it was. And anyway, Ellen White said to Megan and Sutherland, because she was there at the time, she said, why don't you come along and maybe we will see something there. So these two men had some ideas about where they wanted to go, but they got up the river a little bit and then the paddle steamer broke down. So while they were stuck there for a couple of days, Ellen White went and looked at some land which was nearby. And the Lord showed her that that land was the best for what they were going to do. But Megan and Sutherland, they went and looked at it and they didn't like it. So they continued up the river and they looked all sorts of places to buy the right place. They couldn't find what they were looking for. And in the end, they realized that God wanted them to buy that particular land. And there was some stony bits on that land and some disadvantages. But Ellen White said that was the place that God wanted them to start. And they eventually agreed, and the land was purchased. Now, when they purchased this land was the beginning of self-supporting ministry supported by the Spirit of Prophecy or by Ellen White. She told them, Megan and Sutherland, that this place, Madison Farm, was not to be under the conference. They were to set it up as under a group of people who were specially dedicated to wanting to fulfill the pattern of these schooling missionary schools. And that's how it was set up. It was set up apart from the main church. And she was on the board, and she gave her financial support to Madison School. This is something that many people don't realise. So she realised that through the conference church that her desires that God had shown her to train missionaries would not be realised. And so Madison School was set up under a independent group of 7 people. But she told them, and she told the church, that they could get money to buy the church from the rest of the Seventh-day Church. So money could be collected from people who wanted to sponsor the work at Madison. And that's how Madison started. And that is the most successful of all these institutions that were begun, and thousands of people were trained at Madison in medical missionary work, in agriculture, in mechanics, and so forth and so on. But eventually, even Madison decided to get accredited. By the AMA, American Medical Association, and also for their educational system. And the educational system that was begun according to God's ways, when this happened, gradually they lost it until it became just like the other institutions, and then eventually it was handed over to the conference, who then sold Madison off. And in time, and that was the end of that one too. So we want to realise that in these last days that independent ministry is not against the writings of Ellen White. That she supported independent ministry in order to fulfill God's will in these last days. And there are groups, small groups all over the world who do independent ministry, who have small institutions where they treat the sick. But once again, such places should be in the country. They should have agricultural land. They should be training places to teach people how to do these remedies, how to farm. They should be run by people who can teach mechanics and home economics, etc., etc. So Solomon Islands is a very privileged place to have a school like this that is run by the main Adventist organisation, but also in various parts of the world there's many of these smaller groups who are trying to fulfill these plans, and we should not feel that they're against the main church. They are complementary places that are fulfilling the will of God in these last days. So that's a quick version of the story of where we're up to today. And God wants to finish his work. God wants to have places where people can learn the natural therapies, how they operate. He wants places where people can recover their from sickness in the country and in learning to live a healthy lifestyle. And in the Solomon Islands here, I believe that we should be really praying that God will give us a place that will fulfill some of these criteria, some of these things, with land, with some buildings, with some opportunity to train people to do medical missionary work in the Solomon Islands and also overseas. So let's pray about it and see how the Lord leads. Yes, brother?
Thank you, brother, for a very interesting explanation that you have given to us this night.
Good.
Looking at these sanitariums, I've been to some of the places in Australia.
Yeah.
Especially one day at the Alanda College, where the sanitarium was.
Which one?
Sydney.
Okay, yeah.
What happened up in the area where the sanitarium was, where Ellen White's first plan.
Yeah.
Well, in regard to what you have said, like, thank you for your explanation, how this health progress is progressing.
Yeah.
In the past days.
Yeah.
But I look much more to what will be a productive approach to this today.
Yeah.
So, for example, like we cannot have the amount of land, okay? But I believe Solomon Island people can do things.
Yeah.
Like, what shall we do? I have 3 points here. Like, if we really believe that we are applying the health which Ellen G. White was sold,
Yeah.
and then we must focus on number one, food, because daily consumption of human beings, okay? And then we need education.
Yeah.
What sort of education? The first and foremost education should be a organic compost farm. That we will avoid most of these drugs in town,
Yeah.
were sold by the Chinese, and you have said already that there are chemicals and drugs that deal with the farm products. So, and the third is for money. So, can you give us some example? What should we do then at the next coming? It's true that we have heard what other people in other big countries are like normally in the college.
Yeah.
Read about that, and so to my point of view, it is my desire that what should be done to us here in Solomon Islands in a very small group like we are here.
Yeah.
So what can we do?
Okay, well,
If you have any a formal or any practical way that we can start as soon as possible, then we can start this. Because God is working with people now, is still work with people before,
yeah.
and God needs our help. So in that common sense, in that understanding, I believe that we need food, we need education, we need money. We use money for the furthering of the gospel.
Yeah.
And if we eat the wrong product in farm, because we don't know how to plant gardens, it is a serious cause. And that's where I see this Adventist people here, even myself, I came to realize that we talk about health reform, but it doesn't eventually happen. So I urge you, my brother, what will you do then if you can give us some examples of what shall we do?
Okay, so this would be an ideal, I would say. I'll just outline what I would think would be an ideal. So, say supposing we lived in an ideal world, or that God opened up the way. Okay, so supposing we were able to buy 30 acres. Or be given 30 acres somewhere in the country. Now, initially I would expect that would be in Guadalcanal, somewhere out of Poniera. But say something like that, well then you would have opportunity for farming. Now Esther runs an excellent clinic in town, basically. It's basically in town, and that's good, but it would be good to set up a place on an area of land like this, maybe on 30 acres, where you had a small sanitarium. For treating the sick. Now, there would be a building, I suppose, something towards what Esther's got now, but I would see that there could be something like a main building, but then there could be small buildings where people who were sick could come and stay in small buildings while they were being treated. They had their own little place to stay in. Now, while they're being treated, if they have enough ability, they would do a little bit of work in, as far as exercise, on the farm. They would learn how to eat. Now, for instance, last year we had Valeriana here. I don't think you were here last year, but those who were, we had Valeriana here. And anybody who knows her knows that she's a very big woman. In the week that she was here, she could hardly walk when she arrived, but by the time she left, she was walking around, wasn't she, and feeling much better. She's almost died from stroke and high blood pressure on more than one occasion. Now, she benefited greatly from eating our food. She didn't have access to any other food, but she was in a spiritual environment. She was in a place where she could feel secure and feel loved and wanted, and she felt God's presence here while she stayed with us. People like that, if they were in a place like this we're talking about here, in the country, away from their family and friends for a while, then they would be eating with the people who were here, the vegetarian diet, the healthy lifestyle diet. They would lose that weight. She would begin to shed a lot of weight. over a period of time. And then she would come to life. She would come to life. And she would improve and improve. And if the damage she's done's not too great, she could live for another 20 years. But at the moment as she is, she may not live much longer. So create a place where people can come. They can stay in small huts. They can learn until they are established. So someone like Valeriana, you would imagine, would have to stay a minimum of 4 to 6 months, I would think, in a place like that to fully recover. For people with lesser problems, they might stay for 2 or 3 weeks, for a week, for a couple of months, etc. Now, while they're staying, they can help on the place. They can learn some cooking. They can chop some food up. They can wash the dishes. They can do their jobs. And this place would also have a small chapel, a place of worship there as well. And it would become a centre for the people who are around. Then someone from Malaita would come and stay here, and they would say, I would like a place like that near my village in Malaita. And so we might say to them, well, send us some young people, we'll train them. So we would train them here, then they would go back to Malaita and they would replicate that in their own area, on a smaller way probably, in some way. And then you would have another centre. Then someone from Western Province might come, and they too would want to set up something like this as well, somewhere in Western Province. And that is the type of missionary work that could really make a change in the Solomon Islands. Because once you have one or two that are done properly, then people will try and copy it. They'll want to copy it. And when someone with diabetes or a stroke who's dying comes to a place like this, they get better. They'll go back to their home and they'll say, people will say, what happened to you? You were almost dead. Now you're doing well. And then they'll explain it and people get interested. So that's how it can work. But that's the type of thing that I see. Also young people, you can bring some young people in who will learn how to do the treatments. They will learn how to farm more. But most people here know quite a lot about farming in Solomon Islands, but perhaps there's new things they could learn. And they could learn some skills about fixing things or about building. So that would be the type of thing that I would see would be really good way of doing it. So we should pray about this because I feel that the Lord might be working in this direction. So does that answer the question?
Thank you so much. Okay,
so you people could do this out at your place.
Yeah.
You could do this out at your place.
That would be the priority in order for us to establish any of these ideas with energy work. done it before. So we start with some plant. And then
Yeah.
we can have the church and we have the garden. And after all, we can have finance and the gospel support. And then we can employ young people. And
Yeah,
then,
that's right.
the church member can come and if our people here cannot have any educational profession, they can come work as a medical missionary for a time, and then
Yeah.
they will learn a lot. Because a type of work as such is living by the divine power.
That's
It's
right.
not
So,
our work, but it's a plan that God wants us to live a healthy life before He comes. And that's the main point. So
Yeah.
we must start at any possible time next year.
yeah.
Yeah.
So say you had 10 to 30 acres. 30 acres would be best. Say you had 10 acres. You grow quite a lot of food there and sell it. And that would help to finance the young people would work on the land. And when the produce is sold, then that would help to finance their education. So that's the type of idea.